The dusty town of Silver Creek had always been a place where whispers traveled faster than the wind. In the evenings, when the golden light of the sun dipped behind the western hills, folks would gather outside the saloon or on their porches, trading stories like poker chips. And lately, all those whispers circled around one woman, Clara Mae Dawson. She wasn't like the other women in Silver Creek. She didn't wear fancy ribbons in her hair, and she didn't spend her afternoons gossiping about who was courting who. Clara's hands were always busy, her heart always burdened, and her little house at the edge of town always full of children who didn't belong to her by blood but belonged to her by love. Clara had no children of her own. Some said it was God's way of testing her, others cruelly hinted she was cursed. But where other women might have let bitterness eat away at their hearts, Clara chose a different path. Each time a child was left crying on the streets, each time a baby was abandoned by parents too poor or too drunk to care, each time a young one found themselves orphaned by the harsh grip of fever or by the violence of men with guns, Clara opened her door. She took them in. She gave them food, a warm bed, and most importantly, hope. But not everyone saw Clara's kindness as a blessing. In fact, many saw it as a threat. She's filling the town with beggars, the storekeeper sneered one afternoon. Those kids will grow up wild, and Silver Creek will pay the price. Others muttered that she was trying to play saint and make the rest of the town look heartless. The mayor, a sharp-eyed man named Harlan Griggs, went further than muttering. He declared in the town square one blistering afternoon that Clara Mae Dawson was a menace. "This is no orphanage town," he barked, his voice echoing against the wooden storefronts. "We are trying to build order, not chaos. A woman taking in strays undermines the fabric of our community." The punishment wasn't written in law, but it was felt in every corner of Clara's life. Store prices doubled when she walked in. Neighbors turned their backs on her in church. Some children were forbidden to play with her orphans, as though kindness were a disease that might spread. Clara knew what they were doing. They wanted to break her. They wanted her to stop taking in children, to send those little ones away to the cold streets, where no one would care if they lived or died. But Clara would not break. Night after night, when the little ones huddled around her fireplace, listening to her soft stories about hope and courage, Clara silently vowed she would fight for them until her last breath. They were her family, her reason for breathing. And yet, despite her bravery, there were nights when Clara sat by the window, watching the dark prairie, wondering if God himself had forgotten her. It was on one of those nights that a sound broke through the silence, the heavy rhythm of hooves against the dirt road. Clara stiffened, clutching the lantern tighter. The children stirred in their beds. She wondered if the mayor had finally sent men to drive her out. But as the rider came closer, she saw him clearly in the lantern light. A tall cowboy, broad-shouldered, with a weathered hat pulled low and eyes that burned with something fierce, something different from the cold judgment she had seen in the townsfolk. He dismounted slowly, his boots crunching on the gravel, and for a long moment, he just stood there, studying her with an intensity that made her heart race. "Evenin', ma'am," he said at last, his voice low, steady, carrying the weight of a man who had seen too much of life. "Name's Cole Turner." Clara swallowed, gripping the lantern. "What do you want?" Cole glanced toward the little house, where the flicker of firelight revealed the faces of children peeking from the windows. He removed his hat, pressing it to his chest with a kind of respect Clara hadn't felt in a long time. "I heard tell about what you're doing here, taking in the ones nobody else wants. That kind of courage, that don't deserve punishment, that deserves help." For the first time in years, Clara Mae Dawson felt her heart shift. A stranger, no, a cowboy had stepped into her life, not to condemn, not to destroy, but to stand beside her. And though she didn't know it yet, his words that night would change everything. Cole Turner wasn't the kind of man who spoke more than he needed to. His life had been long miles of silence. He'd spent years drifting, never calling a place home, never letting people get too close. He'd seen good men buried, bad men prosper, and too many children left in the dust of gunfire and greed. That was why the sight of those wide-eyed orphans behind Clara's window hit him harder than a bullet. They reminded him of his own little sister long gone, now because no one had stepped in to save her when she needed it most. Clara, still clutching the lantern, studied him warily. She'd grown used to men arriving at her door with threats, with orders to stop what she was doing, or with warnings that she was ruining the town's image. But this cowboy's tone was different. It wasn't sharp. It wasn't cruel. It was steady, almost protective. And that frightened her more than the threats, because it tempted her to believe she wasn't alone. "You don't know what you're saying," Clara said at last, her voice low, as though the night itself might be listening. "Folks in this town don't take kindly to what I do. They'll turn on you the way they've turned on me. Ma'am, I've had whole towns turn on me for far less. I've been chased out for winning a poker hand, shot at for looking at the wrong man's horse, and hunted for crimes I didn't commit. But if I'm gonna be hated, I'd rather it be for standing with someone who's doing right." Clara's heart thudded. It had been so long since anyone had called her right. For years, she'd only heard the opposite: troublemaker, meddler, foolish woman. And yet, here stood this lone cowboy, speaking as though her courage was something worth fighting for. Before Clara could answer, a little voice broke the silence. "Miss Clara?" It was Anna, the smallest of the orphans, clutching a rag doll with stuffing poking out the seams. "Is he gonna take us away?" The words stabbed Clara straight in the chest. She crouched down, brushing Anna's hair back gently. "No, sweetheart," she whispered. "Nobody's talking you away. Not while I'm here." Cole's gaze softened. He crouched too, tipping his hat toward Anna. "Evenin', darlin'. Name's Cole, and no, I ain't here to take you away. Matter of fact, I reckon I'm here to help keep you right where you belong." Anna blinked up at him, then hugged her doll tighter. In her small, cautious smile, Clara saw something she hadn't seen in the children for weeks' hope. When the girl padded back inside, Clara rose. Studying Cole, "You're either the bravest fool I've met," she said quietly, "or the kindest." "Maybe both," Cole answered simply. The days that followed changed everything. Cole didn't just disappear into the night like Clara expected. He stayed. He fixed the fence out back, chopped wood for the stove, and even taught the older boys how to saddle a horse. The children, who had once kept their heads down, afraid of every shadow, began to laugh again. For the first time in months, Clara heard the sound of play echoing across her little yard, and it brought tears to her eyes. But the rest of Silver Creek noticed too, and they weren't pleased. Helping her carry flour and beans that the storekeeper had reluctantly sold her at double the price. "You're meddling where you don't belong, Turner," the mayor growled one afternoon, cornering him outside the blacksmith's. Cole didn't flinch. He set the sack of flour down and looked the mayor straight in the eye. "Funny thing about belonging," he said. "Ain't nobody here got the right to tell a man he can't lend a hand. Those orphans will bring ruin on this town," the mayor snapped. "Mark my words, you'll regret standin' with her." Cole's jaw tightened. "I've had worse regrets." With that, he hoisted the sack back over his shoulder and walked away, leaving the mayor fuming. That night, as Clara stood by the fire, she watched Cole show the boys how to whittle a stick into a toy horse. Their eyes glowed in the firelight, their laughter spilling into the room like a hymn. Clara's throat tightened. She had carried this burden alone for so long that she had forgotten what it felt like to have someone beside her. Maybe, just maybe, she thought, God hadn't forgotten her after all. The first real test came sooner than Clara expected. It was a Sunday morning, and though she knew the stairs would burn like fire, she dressed the children in their neatest clothes and led them to church. For Clara, faith wasn't just about hymns and sermons. It was about teaching the little ones that even in a world that had turned cruel, there was still a God who loved them. As she walked up the dusty street, small hands clinging to her skirts, she could feel the eyes on her. The townsfolk lined the path, whispering behind gloved hands, muttering under their breath. Some scoffed openly. Others turned their faces away as if she were a stain. Clara held her chin high, though inside her chest her heart thudded painfully. But Cole walked beside her, his long stride steady, his hand resting protectively on the shoulder of little Jacob, the eldest boy. His presence was like a wall between her and the jeering crowd. The whispers grew quieter when they saw him. There was something about the way Cole Turner carried himself, as if he feared no man alive and dared anyone to challenge him. Inside the church, the atmosphere was thick with judgment. The pews creaked as folks shifted, making space. leaving a wide gap around Clara and her children as if kindness itself might be contagious. Reverend O'Connell paused when he saw them, his lips tightening. He had never been openly cruel, but his silence had always been heavy with disapproval. Today, however, before the sermon began, Cole stood up. "I got something to say." His voice rang out, echoing off the wooden beams. Every head turned, every whisper silenced. Cole's eyes swept across the congregation. "I've been ridden a long road, seen more graves than I care to count. You know what I learned? Towns ain't measured by the gold in their pockets or the laws they write down. They're measured by how they treat the ones with nothing. And right now, this woman," he gestured to Clara, "she's doing more God's work than half of us put together." Gasps rippled through the pews. Some frowned, others shifted uncomfortably. Clara's cheeks burned, but she couldn't look away from Cole. His words were like arrows piercing the armor of lies that had bound this town for years. The Reverend cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable. "Mr. Turner, this is most irregular." "Irregular?" Cole cut him off, his voice sharp but steady. "What's irregular is letting children starve on our streets, while folks argue about what's proper. What's irregular is punishing a woman for showing mercy." For a long moment, silence hung heavy in the room. Then, slowly, Clara felt a small hand slip into hers. It was Anna again, looking up with wide eyes filled not with fear this time, but with pride. The girl's simple trust gave Clara the courage to lift her chin higher. After the service ended, the whispers grew louder outside. But something had shifted. Not everyone looked at her with hatred anymore. Some eyes held doubt, even shame. A seed had been planted, and Clara knew Cole was the one who had planted it. That evening, back at the small homestead, the children gathered around the table as Clara ladled out stew. The pot was thinner than she would have liked, but no one complained. They ate with the eager joy of those who knew what true hunger felt like. Cole sat among them, listening as Anna recited a small prayer. Jacob told a story about a coyote he'd spotted near the fence, and little Rosie giggled at nothing at all. Clara watched him quietly. He didn't just eat. He belonged. He laughed with the children, asked them questions, nodded as though every word mattered. It was as if he had been part of this family for years. When the little ones were tucked into bed, Clara stepped out onto the porch, the night air cool against her skin. Cole was already there, leaning against the railing, his head tilted back as he studied the stars. "You didn't have to speak up today," Clara said softly. He shrugged. "Seemed to me somebody had to." Her voice trembled. "They'll come after you two now. Don't you see? They'll treat you the way they treat me." Cole turned, his gaze steady, unshaken. "Clara, I've been treated worse by men with far meaner hearts. If standing by you means I'm hated, then let 'em hate." Her breath caught in her throat. No one had ever spoken to her like that. For the first time in years, she felt the weight on her shoulders begin to lighten, just a little. But deep down, Clara knew the battle was far from over. If anything, Cole's boldness had stirred the pot. The mayor wouldn't sit quietly. The town wouldn't simply forgive. A storm was coming, and this time, she would not face it alone. The next morning dawned gray, heavy with the promise of rain. Clara rose early, the habit of years pulling her from bed before the children stirred. She moved quietly through the little house, tucking blankets tighter, stoking the fire back to life, setting a pot of water to boil. For her, mornings were always the hardest, those first hours when her mind returned to the weight of her burden. But this morning felt different. For the first time in years, she did not rise alone. Cole was already outside, splitting logs by the woodpile. Each swing of his axe echoed steady and sure, the muscles in his arms rippling as he worked. The children watched from the window, wide-eyed, whispering among themselves. They had never seen a man work with such purpose. Not for them, not in their defense. To them, Cole was more than a cowboy now, he was something like a guardian. Clara stepped out onto the porch, folding her arms against the chill. "You've been at it since dawn," she said quietly. Cole glanced up, sweat on his brow, and gave a half-smile. "Figure if the mayor's gonna stir trouble, best we be ready. Cold nights are comin'." She nodded, touched more deeply than she could say. For so long, she had been the only one thinking ahead, the only one planning, the only one holding the line. Now, for the first time, someone else shared that burden. By midday, the rain came. It wasn't gentle, it was a storm. The kind that rattled shutters and turned the dirt road into a river of mud. The children huddled inside. Thunder shaking the windows. Lightning tearing the sky. Clara tried to hide her own fear, but her voice shook when another clap of thunder rattled the little house. Cole sat with them, calm as a stone, where lightning split a tree right in front of him. The children gasped, clinging closer, but then laughed when he told how his horse spooked so hard it nearly threw him into a river. Cole made even the storm seem like an adventure, and slowly the children's fear melted away. Clara watched him, her heart tightening. How had this stranger walked into her life and changed so much so quickly? She had built walls so high around her heart that no one could reach her, yet Cole Turner had stepped over them, as though they were nothing. When the storm finally broke, and the air smelled of wet earth and fresh hope, Clara stepped outside to breathe it in. She felt a hand at her shoulder and turned to see Cole, his hat dripping rainwater, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "They'll come harder now," he said quietly. She swallowed. "You mean the mayor? And anyone who thinks his way?" Cole replied. "Storm like that inside town? It's buildin' same as the one that just passed." Clara's chest ached. She knew he was right. The townsfolk would not let her carry on forever. But for the first time, she also knew she wouldn't face them alone. That night, when the children were finally asleep, Clara sat at the table with Cole. The lantern flickered between them, shadows playing across the rough wooden walls. "Why are you doing this?" she asked softly. "Why me? Why them?" Cole leaned back, his gaze dropping to the lantern flame. For a long time, he didn't speak, and Clara thought perhaps he wouldn't answer at all. Then his voice came low, almost like a confession. "When I was a boy, I had a little sister," he began. "Her name was Mary, sweetest soul you'd ever meet. Our ma died young, and pa, well, he wasn't much for carin'. Mary and me, we had to fend for ourselves. One winter, she got sick, real sick. I went beggin' for help, knockin' on doors, a-skin folks with more than enough to spare. But they turned me away, said it weren't their problem. By the time I got back, she was gone." Clara's throat tightened, tears welling in her eyes. She whispered, "Oh, Cole." He shook his head, his jaw tight. "Ever since that day, I swore I'd never walk away again. If I saw someone standin' alone, fightin' for something good, I'd stand with them. Guess that's why I'm here." Clara's hand trembled on the table, yet inside, something shifted. The night grew quiet, the storm outside finally gone. But Clara knew another storm was coming. The mayor wouldn't rest. The town wouldn't forgive. But now she had Cole Turner, a man who carried scars of his own yet still chose to fight for others. And with him by her side, she began to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could weather whatever came next. The days rolled on, and with each sunrise, Clara felt the air around her growing heavier. The kindness Cole had shown, the laughter returning to her little house, it all felt like borrowed time, fragile as glass, because beyond the warmth of her home, she could sense the storm brewing in Silver Creek. The mayor had not forgotten her defiance. In fact, his voice grew sharper, his warnings louder. At the saloon, at the blacksmith's, on the church steps, he told anyone who would listen that Clara Mae Dawson was a danger to the town. He painted her not as a savior of children, but as a woman gone mad, a lawbreaker who would drag Silver Creek into ruin. And though not all believed him, enough nodded along to feed the fire. Clara knew the moment would come when whispers would no longer be enough, when words would turn into action. That fear pressed on her chest day and night. She tried to hide it from the children, but Cole could see it in her eyes. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the prairie gold, Clara stood by the garden fence, staring out at the wide, endless land. She had once thought that horizon meant freedom. Now it felt like the edge of a cage. Cole came up behind her, leaning against the post. "You're thinking too hard again," he said gently. She sighed. "I can't help it. They won't let me go on like this. They'll come for the children, Cole, I can feel it." He tipped his hat back, studying her. "Then we'll be ready. Whatever storm they bring, we'll face it." Clara turned to him, her voice breaking. "Why? Why would you risk everything for me? For them, you don't owe us anything." Cole's jaw tightened. "I told you once already. Clara, I've seen what happens when folks look the other way. I ain't about to let it happen again. Not while I still got breath in my lungs. Her throat closed, words tangled in her chest. She wanted to tell him how much his presence meant, how much lighter the burden felt with him beside her. But all she managed was a whisper. I don't know how to thank you. You don't owe me thanks, Cole replied softly. Just keep fighting. That's all. The days that followed proved his warning true. One morning, a folded paper was nailed to her door. You are hereby ordered to appear before the town council in 7 days' time. The matter of the orphans under your care will be decided by law. Clara's heart sank. This was at the moment she had dreaded. The moment they would drag her and the children into the open and try to take everything away. When she showed Cole, he didn't curse or panic. But we won't be alone. Clara frowned. What do you mean? He met her eyes, a glimmer of determination in his. You think you're the only one in this town touched by kindness. You've fed more mouths than you know. You've given hope to more souls than you realize. They may be too scared to speak now, but when the time comes, we'll see who stands where. Clara wanted to believe him. She wanted to trust that the goodness she had sown might finally bear fruit. But fear gnawed at her still. She lay awake at night, listening to the soft breaths of the children, praying over each little face, begging God not to let them be torn away. Cole stayed near her side through it all. He mended fences, sharpened tools, taught the boys how to ride. With every day that passed, the children clung to him more. Clara saw it in their eyes, heard it in their laughter, and against her better judgment, she felt it in her own heart too. On the eve of the council meeting, Clara stood by the fire, her hands clenched tight. Tomorrow decides everything, she whispered. Cole came to her side, his voice low but firm. No, tomorrow don't decide everything. Tomorrow just shows this town who we are. And I reckon we're stronger than they think. Maybe they were stronger. Maybe together they could stand. And as the firelight flickered across their faces, the children sleeping peacefully in the next room, Clara Mae Dawson felt something stir in her chest. It wasn't fear this time, it was courage. Because tomorrow, no matter what came, she would not walk alone. The morning of the council meeting dawned gray and heavy, as if the sky itself carried the weight of what was about to unfold. Clara woke before the children, her chest tight with worry. The letter from the mayor had been folded and unfolded so many times it had grown soft at the edges. She held it in her hands one last time before tucking it away in a drawer. No piece of paper could tell her what those children meant to her. She dressed them carefully, smoothing down their hair, tying ribbons, making sure their shoes were clean. Cole was waiting by the gate when she stepped outside, his hat pulled low, his eyes scanning the street. He looked calm, but Clara noticed how his hand rested on the leather strap of his holster, as if ready for whatever might come. You don't have to come, she whispered as she joined him, though her voice shook with the lie. He turned to her, his gaze steady. Yes, I do. You think I'd let you face them alone? Not a chance. The walk into town felt longer than ever before. The children held Clara's hands tight, their little faces pale with nerves though none of them said a word. People watched from porches and shop fronts as she passed, some with pity, some with suspicion, others with hard, cold judgment. She forced herself to keep her chin up. When they reached the town hall, a crowd had already gathered. Clara's heart sank at the sight of its so many faces, all waiting to see her fate decided. The mayor stood at the top of the steps, his chest puffed like a rooster. Inside, the council chamber smelled of old wood and dust. The benches were filled, townsfolk leaning forward eagerly. Clara sat at the front with the children huddled close. Cole stood behind her, tall and unshakable. The mayor banged a gavel against the table. This council is called to order. We are gathered to address the matter of Clara Mae Dawson and her unlawful harboring of vagrant orphans. The words stung like a lash. Clara's hands trembled in her lap, but she held her head high. The mayor continued, his voice smooth and calculated. Miss Dawson has taken it upon herself to shelter unwanted children. With no husband, no income, and no standing to her name, this recklessness puts a burden on the town's resources and undermines the order we work so hard to preserve. It cannot continue. A murmur rippled through the room. Some nodded in agreement. Others shifted uncomfortably. Clara could feel their eyes on her like weights pressing her down. "Is there anything you wish to say in your defense, Miss Dawson?" the mayor asked, though his tone dripped with mock courtesy. Clara rose slowly to her feet. Her knees felt weak, but when she looked down at the children's faces wide-eyed, frightened, clinging to one another's strength filled her chest. She lifted her chin. "These children are not a burden. They are lives precious, innocent lives that deserve love and care. I didn't take them in because it was easy. I took them in because no one else would, because I could not stand by and watch them suffer." Her voice wavered at first, but with each word it grew stronger. "If that is unlawful, then perhaps the law itself needs mending. But I will not apologize for giving them a home. I will not call them unwanted, because to me they are everything." A hush fell over the room, but then the mayor's laughter rang out, cold and sharp. "Pretty words," he sneered, "but words don't fill stomachs. Words don't keep roofs from collapsing. You've taken on more than you can manage, and this town cannot afford to indulge your bleeding heart. She ain't alone." All eyes turned as Cole stepped forward. He tipped his hat back, his gaze sweeping the room like a storm front. "You call her reckless?" he said, his voice carrying to every corner. "I call her brave. She's doing the job half of you wouldn't dare to try caring for the helpless, feeding the hungry, and she's doing it without a skin a dime from any of you. That ain't." The council chamber emptied in a storm of whispers and heated voices. Others lingered, casting sympathetic glances at Clara, their eyes saying what their lips dared not. The children clung to her skirts, their little fingers digging into the fabric, as though they feared they'd be torn away that very moment. Cole stayed close, a shadow of protection at her side. His jaw was clenched so tight Clara thought he might grind his teeth to dust. "They won't take Em," he said low, though whether he meant it as a promise or a prayer, she couldn't tell. Outside, the square was alive with noise. Townsfolk gathered in knots, arguing. A rancher's wife was saying loudly, "That woman's doing more good than most preachers ever did. Who are we to tell her no?" A shopkeeper snapped back, "And who's payin' for all those mouths? We can't carry her charity on our backs." She walked forward, holding the children's hands tighter. Every face seemed to burn into her. Some shone with admiration, some with cold disapproval, and a few with outright hostility. The mayor's words had planted division, but division could sometimes be the first crack before change. When they reached the edge of the square, Clara felt a tug on her sleeve. Her eyes darted nervously as she leaned close. "Don't you give up, Clara," she said softly. "You've given those children hope. Some of us, we see it. We see you." She pressed a loaf of bread into Clara's hands before hurrying away, as if afraid of being caught. Clara's throat tightened. For every cruel glance, there was also kindness. Quiet but real. That night, the little house felt smaller than ever. The children tried to eat their supper, but their eyes kept darting to Clara, searching her face for answers she didn't have. When the youngest girl, Annie, whispered, "Are they gonna take us away?" Clara nearly broke. She gathered them close, her voice trembling but firm. "No one's taking you away. Not while I have breath in my body." Cole lingered by the doorway, watching. When the children finally drifted to sleep, he stepped outside, and Clara followed, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. The prairie night stretched wide, stars scattered across the black. For a long moment, they stood in silence, the cool wind rustling the grass. Finally, Clara spoke. "Maybe they're right. Maybe I took on too much." Cole turned sharply to her, his eyes flashing. "Don't you start thinking that way. You did what no one else had the guts to do. That ain't weakness, Clara. That's the purest kind of strength." She shook her head, tears stinging her eyes. "Strength doesn't keep food on the table. Strength doesn't keep the law from tearing them away." Cole stepped closer, his voice low but fierce. "Then we'll find a way, together." The word hung in the air, together. Clara's heart thudded at the sound. No one had ever stood beside her like this. Not since her parents passed. Not since she'd been left to face the world alone. For the first time in years, she felt the heavy burden shift, just slightly, as if someone else was truly willing to carry it with her. Before she could answer, a stone clattered against the wall of the house. Clara startled, clutching her shawl tight. Another stone followed, and then a voice from the darkness. "You'll bring ruin to this town, woman. Best give 'em up before worse comes." Cole moved fast, striding out into the yard. his hand resting on the handle of his revolver. "Show yourself," he barked, but the shadows swallowed whoever it was. Footsteps retreating fast into the night. Clara's heart pounded. This was more than whispers now. It was threats. The line between disapproval and violence had been crossed. Cole returned to her side, his expression carved from stone. "It's startin'," he muttered. "They're trying to scare you off." Clara's voice shook, but there was steel beneath it. "They'll have to try harder. Those children are my family. I won't abandon them." Cole studied her in the starlight, and in that moment, he knew her courage matched his own. He placed a hand over hers, grounding her. "Then they'll have to come through me too." The night stretched on heavy and uneasy, but Clara didn't falter. Fear pressed close, but so did resolve. And as she watched Cole stand guard outside her little home, she realized something she hadn't dared to before: she wasn't alone anymore. The morning came with a restless hush over the town. Clara hardly slept. Every creak of the floorboards, every whistle of wind outside her window felt like it carried danger. She knew she could not waver. By midday, word spread that the mayor had called for a public hearing in today's time. Posters were nailed to the posts outside the saloon and the general store. On account of unlawful conduct and improper guardianship, Clara Hensley is summoned before the council. Judgment to be rendered. "Let him summon you," he said. His voice edged with iron. "You'll stand, and I'll stand beside you. They think they're settlin' law. What they're really settlin' is whether this town has a soul." The notice hit the town like a hammer. People divided fast, some saying the mayor was right, that no single woman had the right to take in so many orphans. Others whispered their support for Clara, though few dared say it too loud. That evening, Clara sat with the children around the table. Their prayers before supper carried a new kind of weight. Little Annie's voice was soft, but certain. "Please don't let anyone take us from Miss Clara." The words shattered Clara's heart, yet they also built her resolve higher than stone walls. Later, Cole and Clara walked out to the pasture behind her home. The sky stretched wide, painted in streaks of dying light. Clara's voice was low. "Cole, if the council rules against me, they'll send the children away. They'll scatter them to workhouses, to strangers. I don't know if I can bear it." Cole looked at her, the lines of his face sharp with determination. "Then we don't let it come to that. We fight. If they want to take those kids, they'll have to come through us. Through me." Her eyes stung with tears. She tried to blink away. "Why?" she whispered. "Why are you doing this for me, for us?" He paused, and for the first time since she'd met him, his voice softened. "Because I know what it's like to lose everything, to be small and scared and left behind. And because you're the only person I ever met who's brave enough to stand against the whole world for what's right. That kind of courage deserves someone fightin' beside it." Clara's breath caught. She turned away slightly, for fear he'd see the emotions rising in her eyes. But inside, something shifted: a trust, a bond forming like roots sinking deep into the earth. Suddenly, a group of townsfolk passed along the road nearby, their lanterns bobbing in the dusk. One voice called out mockingly, "Better say goodbye to your little brood, Miss Hensley. Council see sense soon enough." Laughter followed, fading into the distance. Clara's fists clenched, but Cole laid a steadying hand on her shoulder. "Let 'em laugh," he murmured. "They won't be laughing long." That night, Clara looked at the sleeping children and realized this fight was no longer hers alone. The weight she had carried for so long was now shared, and though the road ahead promised hardship, she felt for the first time in years like hope was not a distant dream, but something she could reach. The storm was coming. The council's judgment would decide not just her fate, but the future of every child under her roof. Yet Clara knew this much: she would not bend, she would not bow. Not while Cole Turner stood beside her, not while those children needed her. She whispered into the silence of the night, more to herself than anyone else, "They'll have to tear my heart out before they tear them away." And with that vow, Chapter 1 closed not with peace, but with the fire of defiance burning bright, ready to face whatever trial lay ahead. The sun rose over Silver Creek with a pale glow, as if the sky itself were cautious about the storm it was about to witness. Clara Mae Dawson stood on the porch of her little home, her hands wrapped around a mug of coffee that had long since gone cold, her eyes fixed on the horizon where the town hall rose like a silent sentinel. Today was the day the council would gather, the mayor would speak, and the fate of the children rested entirely in the balance. She could hear the soft, uneven breathing of the little ones behind her, still clinging to the security of the home that had become their sanctuary. Cole Turner, tall and unwavering as always, leaned against the railing beside her, scanning the path leading into town. He had spent the morning checking the saddles and weapons, not for aggression, but for readiness. Clara felt a surge of gratitude for his presence. He was more than a protector. He was a shield against the fear that threatened to paralyze her. As they walked into the square, the children holding tightly to her skirts, the townsfolk began to gather, some with curiosity, others with hostility. The mayor, Harlan Griggs, stood on the steps of the town hall, his posture stiff, his eyes sharp with calculation. The council members, seated behind him, murmured among themselves, ready to witness what would either be a public spectacle or a lesson in justice. Clara's heart pounded as whispers slithered through the crowd like snakes, carrying tales of rebellion, defiance, and the audacity of one woman who dared to care for children abandoned by the world. Cole's hand brushed hers, grounding her, reminding her silently that she was not alone. When the mayor finally spoke, his voice boomed across the square, calling her actions reckless, illegal, and a danger to the town's order. Clara straightened her back, lifted her chin, and met his words with quiet defiance. She spoke of love, of duty, of the sacred responsibility to protect those who could not protect themselves. And with each word, a subtle hush fell over the audience. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd, small yet undeniable, and for the first time, she saw courage reflected in the eyes of strangers who might just stand with her. The mayor's face hardened with anger, but before he could respond, Cole's deep voice rang out, carrying across the square. He spoke of justice, of honor, of humanity, and of the legacy of kindness that Clara had nurtured despite the town's scorn. His words drew attention, tilting the crowd's hearts, some nodding, others shifting uneasily, and the mayor found himself losing the grip he had so carefully maintained. The children, sensing the tension, clung to Clara and to one another, yet their eyes were wide with hope, reflecting the courage that began to bloom in her own heart. One by one, the townsfolk began to step forward. Mrs. Hattie, the elderly widow, shared the story of her lost grandson, praising Clara's selflessness. The blacksmith spoke of his son being fed and clothed by her hands. A rancher admitted the truth that his own niece had been cared for when he could offer nothing. Each story chipped away at the walls of judgment, and slowly the mayor's authority began to crumble under the weight of undeniable truth. Faced with the town rising in quiet rebellion against his decree, he attempted to assert his dominance, but Cole and Clara, side by side, stood firm, a living embodiment of resistance and compassion. The council members shifted uncomfortably, caught between the cold logic of law and the undeniable humanity they witnessed before them. Tensions ran high, voices rose, but the clarity of right versus wrong could not be silenced. By mid-afternoon, it became evident that the tide had turned. The mayor, realizing his authority had lost, faltered, and the council, inspired by the courage and integrity of Clara and Cole, voted to allow her to keep the children under her care. Recognizing the moral imperative that outweighed mere legality, relief washed over Clara as tears pricked her eyes. The children's laughter, nervous at first, began to bubble forth, filling the square with a sound that was sweeter than any sermon or decree. Cole gave her a quiet nod, his expression calm but triumphant, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, Clara allowed herself to exhale fully. The townsfolk, now divided no longer, approached her cautiously, some offering apologies, others simply acknowledging her courage with quiet nods. And slowly, the fabric of community began to mend, stitched together by truth and empathy. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the sky was painted with streaks of gold and crimson, Clara walked with the children to the edge of the field, Cole following closely, the quiet hero of their story. The house, once a sanctuary, now felt like a home reinforced by courage and love. She watched the children run and play, their laughter ringing across the open prairie, and realized that what had once been a simple act of kindness had grown into a beacon of hope for all of Silver Creek. Cole approached her, his hand brushing against hers, and she felt the warmth of companionship she had long thought lost. "We did it," she whispered, not because she believed it was over, but because she understood that standing for what is right, together, made them stronger than any opposition. Cole smiled, his eyes reflecting the fading sunlight. "No," he said softly. "They did it. We just stood beside them." Clara turned to the children, her heart swelling with pride, and realized that love, courage, and steadfastness had not only protected them, but had also inspired a town to remember what it meant to care. That night, the children slept peacefully in their beds, dreams filled with laughter and safety, while Clara and Cole sat quietly on the porch, gazing at the stars above. The trials of the town, the threats, the whispered malice all seemed distant now, as if the world itself had paused to honor the bravery they had shown. In that stillness, Clara felt the weight of loneliness lift, replaced by a sense of belonging she had never known. Together, they had faced fear, injustice, and cruelty, and together, they had prevailed. She looked at Cole and smiled, realizing that their journey had not only saved the children, but had transformed them both. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the promise of new days, laughter, and hope. And as Clara whispered to herself, "We will face whatever comes, together," she knew that the town of Silver Creek would never forget the courage of one woman who refused to stand down, nor the cowboy who stood by her side through it all. Their story, etched in hearts and memories, would remain as a testament to bravery, love, and the power of unity. And in the quiet glow of the porch lantern, Clara Mae Dawson finally allowed herself to rest, knowing that the children were safe. The town's hearts had been touched, and the battle for goodness had been won.